Following presentation was recorded live at the Andrews Center Conference on Women and Leadership, September 10, 2014. Admiral Michelle Howard is the Vice Chief of Naval Operations for the United States Navy. She is the second highest ranking person in the Navy and the first woman to hold this position. The title of her speech is Pioneering Success.
Well, it's easy enough for me to come talk to folks who live in a landlocked state since I call Aurora, Colorado my home. And it was from there that I said, gosh, I'd like to go into the service. And then eventually applied and was accepted to Annapolis. And I want to thank you, Archie, for asking me to come talk today because women leadership is something very near and dear to my heart and something I've talked about to many groups over the years. And then, as I did talk about it, I found that there is this sort of nexus between where I grew up and being a woman leader and being a pioneer. But before I get into that, I'd like to start with a sea story. And being a sea story, this one's absolutely true. I had taken command of Rushmore in 1999, and it was exciting. And I deployed and I came back. And then I had one of the biggest challenges of my career. I was asked to go talk to an elementary school class. Well, these students, they were wonderful. There were about 30 of them, and I talked to them about what life was like at sea. And then they started asking me questions, and they were so gracious. They asked me simple things. Do you see dolphins at sea? And I'm like, yes, I know that answer. Why are ships gray? Oh, yeah. And then this little boy stood up, and he says, how can you be in command of a ship? You're, and he's searching for words. And it's amazing in those few seconds how much went through my mind. You're, and I'm thinking, oh my God, is he going to say you're a woman? You know, how do I react? He's the child. And then he goes, you're, and I thought, oh my God, is he going to talk about me being black? Because that would be the end of it. He goes, how can you be in command of a ship? You're short. Because diversity is not about height. Diversity is about the opportunity to reach the heights. Leadership, the opportunity to be successful. That's what leadership's about. Pioneering success, first slide. Pioneering success is about what the women ahead of us, how they succeeded in a tough environment. And as I looked at women pioneers, I thought a lot about the attributes they had to have to be successful. And you think about the pioneering journey, there's this isolation. There's this leaving what you know. There's this leaving things behind. There's new skills you have to learn. And more importantly, there's this isolation from other women. And so when I looked at pioneering women, I said, wow, there's a lot of things they had to do. They had to commit to the journey. They had to travel light. They had to develop stamina. They definitely had to have a sense of humor. But they also had to figure out how to stay connected. And so there are many pioneers in our lives who are successful that we can use as examples. And some of them, they're right here in your hometown. Gracie Poyce. And when you think about her going into the politics and getting elected as a congresswoman in 1953, clearly very symbolic of being a pioneer in the isolation as a woman. But how successful she was. Your own Barbara Morgan. You think about being a teacher in space in the 1980s. There could not have been that many other women at NASA. And then for me in the Navy, there's Joy Bright Hancock. She joined the Navy in World War I, right after it was first open to women and only as reserves, and she was a yeoman. She became a chief. She left the Navy, and she rejoined the Navy in World War II. And then she became so successful as an officer, she eventually became the director of the Waves. And so by the time the war ended, she probably had about 80,000 women underneath her. She was actually asked to testify about the value of whether or not women should be on active duty in the service, because up through the wars, women had been in the reserves, and after the war, we would disband them and let them go. And in testimony to Congress, she said, you know, when you have this really valuable weapon system, you don't put it away and let it rust, and you don't abolish it. And I thought, how wonderful that this leader could tell Congress that women were this fantastic weapon at the nation's disposal. And so because of her effort and conversation, the government passed the Women's Service Integration Act, and women were allowed to go on active duty in 1948. So we always have leaders who were pioneers that we can look to, who had these attributes of success. But let me talk a little bit more about those attributes. Next slide. Commit to the journey. So now you gotta leave your home. You gotta leave it all behind. And you gotta embrace this journey with passion, this leadership journey, this pioneering journey. And you might go, well, I'm not really a pioneer. Well, Department of Labor says that if you're in an occupation where there's 25% or less women, you're in non-traditional work. So many of you probably are pioneers, particularly those of you in engineering. So you need to commit to the journey. And let me give you an example of what happens when you don't commit. In 1847, Elizabeth Greer starts to go across to the west with her husband. About halfway across, she's done. She's done. She tells her husband, I am not getting in the wagon. He talks to her for 3 hours, finally packs the kids up in the wagon and starts heading west. Then he feels bad about it. Puts his oldest son on a horse, sends the son back out to go find Elizabeth. Elizabeth, sneaking along the rocks, is kind of trailing behind the wagons, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, that makes sense because there's nothing else out there. She pops up and the husband is like, where are you? Where's our son? Elizabeth goes, I hit him in the head with a rock. Husband gets panicked, grabs another horse, goes riding out after the son. Elizabeth burns down the wagons. So I'm looking, and I know some of you on your journey, you have burnt down some wagons. If you are going on this journey, you better commit, because you'll be like my sister. I'll burn that bridge when I come to it. This is stressful stuff. Think about it. Embrace it. Commit to it. And each of you will have your own moment of realization. When I was a lieutenant commander, there were very few women who were unrestricted line, pilots, surface warfare officers. And I just felt like I was getting all this extra work on top of my job, doing representational duties, speaking, doing presentations. And I called my mother one day, and I was complaining about it. And I was literally just fed up. And she said, you need to stop. You are where you are. And if you don't embrace it now, you will not succeed. So either embrace it or leave the Navy. Of course, I'm like, oh, God, I thought you'd be sympathetic. But she was right. Like most moms and dads, she was right. You have to embrace it. And then I thought, okay, you got it, you got to get this passion. And then I thought, how do you get the passion? So then I'm still continuing on my career, and then I made 1 star. Well, the Navy has this wonderful program. When you make 1 star, they take you through training with your fellow 1 stars and senior executives who are civilians. And you do a 360, you do a evaluation where your seniors evaluate you, your subordinates evaluate you, and then you get time with a coach. And I thought, this is perfect. I am going to talk to her about this journey and this whole motivational passion thing. So at the end of the week, I got my time with the coach. We go over all my analysis, all the feedback, and I said, let me talk to you about this whole passion, motivation thing. And, being on this journey and not, burning the wagon down. And so she listens to me, and then she says, oh. She goes, that's easy. I go, okay. And I'm ready. I'm going to get from a coach, a mentor, these great leadership advice. And I'm just like, okay, tell me. She goes, fake it till you make it. There you go. And then I said, okay, well, I don't know how much money we paid her. But it did get me thinking, and then I thought, no, I'm not accepting it because it's not eloquently phrased. But there's the Maya Angelou version of it. There is. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. She's telling me to inspire myself, to be passionate as a leader, and that when I am passionate and I project it, I bring the whole team with me. And that when you embrace the journey, you must be passionate, and you will bring the rest of the wagon train along with you. Next slide. So the other part about committing to the journey is you also have to travel light. And there's this piece where the pioneering woman had to make choices. They'd load that wagon up, and then they'd sit there and they'd say, gosh, as the journey went on, the china's kind of heavy, and maybe I don't need the china. They might have some musical instrument. And then as the journey goes farther along, they suddenly realize, I don't need all these things. Maybe all what I really need is the preserves to get to the end. So as you travel as a pioneer, you let things go. And I would encourage you that if you're in a non-traditional field, let the baggage go. Let the baggage go. Because you can let it go at the start of the journey, or you'll probably be forced to let it go as you go along. And so it's probably a lot easier to think about it and let it go as you go along and make those choices, self-assess, and let it go. The other thing pioneering women had was stamina, and Sacagawea was an Idaho person before there was Idaho. And I'm always in admiration of a woman who could walk halfway across the country with her kid on her back while the guys are like, oh, let's follow her. Pretty. But this is another one where you've got this whole heritage piece of what women have done and are iconic leaders for us to follow. Mary Walker, not the Mary Walker who became the Civil War doctor, she's a classic example of stamina. She was a pioneer in the 1830s and 40s in Oregon. And when I first read about her, I was really impressed. And you think about 1830s and 1840s and what life was like. This is an excerpt from Mary Walker's diary. Rose about 5. Had my breakfast. Got my housework done about 9. Baked 6 loaves of bread. Made a kettle of mush, and have now a suet pudding and beef boiling. So the diary entry goes on and on and on up until the evening. And after this full day of work, her last entry is 9:00 p.m. was delivered of another son. Some of you are going to sit there and go, well, I got childcare, I got... Mary Walker had 8 children, sometimes with a doctor present. Lots of stamina if you're going to be a pioneer. Just think about it. But it's all achievable. And today, I get inspiration from the women around me. The upper corner are Women Marines, who are a female engagement team in Afghanistan in 2012. They trained like infantrymen. They go out and they can speak to the women in the community and get information that male soldiers cannot get. But that information helps save lives on the battlefield. Here in Idaho, you've got Kimberly Teshpan, who is the first women battalion commander, 2 tours in Iraq. And if you think about pioneering work, Boise State graduate in engineering. And then up in the corner, you've got Senior Airman Charlene LaPlante, who's a search, evasion, rescue, and escape SEER instructor. And that's a course where only 50% of the instructors pass the course. And what Charlene talked about when she first passed was that she needed mental stamina. So there's a physical stamina that comes with leadership, but there's also a mental stamina. But she also talks about the teamwork. And you will find, being a leader, that the teamwork is the best part. Next slide. Sense of humor. Captain Winifred Quick Collins joined the Navy in World War II as a reservist. She was one of the first women to graduate from Harvard Business School. So she became a WAVE, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. And when the war started, women were not allowed to serve overseas. Captain Collins stayed in the Navy, and she actually grew up to also be one of the directors of the WAVES. And that's the highest rank she reached. It's interesting for someone like me who's an admiral. When the Women's Service Integration Act was passed in 1948, I mentioned that, it also capped the percentage of women on active duty to 2%. It also said no woman could be greater than the rank of captain or colonel in the service. So someone like Captain Collins, who has about 80,000 women underneath her, could be no rank like this. That law was not lifted till 1967. So Captain Winifred Quick Collins, when she was a lieutenant, was just Lieutenant Quick. It was before she was married. Coming towards the end of the war, she's going to go out to Hawaii. And she's got 2 other lieutenants who are going to go out there, and we're going to start moving women out to Hawaii to pick up the administrative duties. Her 2 friends, Louise Wild, and another friend who was also called Winifred Love. So the 3 lieutenants go out to Hawaii. Turns out, word gets out that they're going out there. This part always marvels me. There's a Denver millionaire, because this never happened to me. There's a Denver millionaire, and I'm from Aurora, Colorado. There's a Denver millionaire who has a house on Oahu, who says, well, ladies, since you're going to Hawaii, you may stay in my home. There's a steward with it. And they, of course, being smart lieutenants, go, yeah. So they get to Hawaii. They're there. They get their first weekend, and they go to the house. And it's on the beach, and it's beautiful. And it's got one of those huge living room glass windows. And Lieutenant Quick is looking out the window, and she sees a man coming down the beach. He's in shorts and an aloha shirt. And as he's getting closer, she goes, oh, my God, that's Admiral Bull Halsey. Admiral Bull Halsey. So he comes up to the door, knocks on the door, and says, this is a beautiful home. I've always wanted to come in and see it. May I see it? And she's just thrilled. She's like, yes, of course, come on in. And so she introduces herself. I'm Winifred Quick. And the man's just looking at her, but he doesn't introduce himself. And she goes, well, maybe it's not Bull Halsey. Then her 2 friends come in, and she goes, these are my friends. Louise Wild, Winifred Love. And then the steward came in. She goes, we can get you a great drink, please. And the man goes, no. And he runs out the door. And all 3 of them are like, what just happened? What just happened? So they finish their weekend. She gets back to work on Monday, and the phone rings in her office. And it's a 2-star, Rear Admiral Carney, Admiral Halsey's chief of staff. This is Admiral Carney. This is Lieutenant Quick. Oh, yes, sir. I understand Admiral Halsey was in your house this weekend. Yes, sir. Why did you not introduce yourself? Well, he didn't introduce himself. Well, Lieutenant, it turns out that when Admiral Halsey went into the house, The house is close to the welfare and rec center for all of the officers. He went running back to the welfare and rec center. He got a hold of his aide-de-camp and he said, "Get in here." He goes, "I don't believe it. That house on the beach, there's 3 attractive women in their house, and their names are Quick Wild Love. I think they're spies. They're going to put their swimsuits on, they're going to attract the men, and we're going to tell our secrets to them. You aide-de-camp, you go get the intel people, you go find out who they are, and I want to report on my desk tomorrow morning." So Admiral Carney, being the chief of staff, they go find out their waves, comes in and the next day and says, "Admiral, it's okay. It's just naval officers at the house." And Admiral Halsey goes, "I didn't see any naval officers." "No, Admiral, women naval officers." And Halsey goes, "Dear God, not even the Japanese did this to me." You must keep your sense of humor, which Captain Quick did, but she also kept a sense of herself, which is just as important. Be confident and be proud on this pioneering journey. Next slide. Wow. Wow. And then you get there. Isn't it beautiful? And then you go, where's the house? Yeah, you get to the destination, and the journey's not over. You have got to build the house. You have got to build the house. So for pioneering women, it's building the house, helping make the farm, helping take care of the kids, starting the family. For us, when we get to whatever that destination point is, it's laying that foundation of success. So you might sit there and say, "Well, my goal is to be CEO of the company." Well, when you get there, it is yours to build. Your job's not done as a leader when you get there. You've got to build it. You've got to build it. Next slide. So now you've been there for a while, and you're kind of like, where is everybody? Because your next neighbor is probably 10, 15, 20 miles away. And so there's this isolation piece that comes with being a pioneer. Once again, we can learn from the women who came before us. They figured out that you got to get together. You got to have a quilting bee. Okay, the quilting bee is not about quilts. The quilting bee is about an opportunity to get together and exchange wisdom. The quilting bee is about sharing knowledge. How do you take care of people in the family who are sick? How do you do these things? If you are in a field where you are isolated, you must obligate to yourself that you will get together with people of shared experience sets so that you can exchange wisdom. Something as simple as coming to this grand quilting bee is a good idea. You will connect and you will talk with people who have the same shared experience sets, and you'll exchange good ideas and good information. And then at some point, next slide, at some point, after you've built the home and you're having the quilting bees, you sit there and you go, wow, pioneering success, I made it. I'm a leader, I've done all these things. And then you go, it's interesting, my perspective changed to the entire way of the journey. Because that first part of the journey was all about survival, wasn't it? Getting in that wagon and getting across country. And the second part of the journey was building the home, building my foundation. And the third part of the journey, sitting here in my rocking chair, is, I guess I better give back to the community. I'm not just going to go to the quilting bee. I'm going to host the quilting bee. And I'm going to talk to those other young women and make sure they know how to be a good pioneer. So it's a wonderful, wonderful journey. And I suspect many of you are on it. Our mothers, our previous aunts have taught us a lot. Commit to the journey, travel light, develop stamina, keep a sense of humor, but stay connected to other women. So thank you. And with that, I will take your questions.
Admiral, did any man ever tell you that you are not qualified to serve in the military?
I'm thinking the first person who said that to me who was a guy was my older brother. It's true. I saw this television show about service academies. I was 12 years old. I thought, wow, I want to do that. It's a leadership thing. When I grow up, I want to be in charge. So I go to my older brother, who had been a good friend and confidant. I'm like, oh, I want to go to a service academy. And he's like, women can't go. What? Women can't go. They're closed to women. It's the law. It's the law. It's the law. It was the law. Women can go to service academies. It was the law. So I go to my mother. What? She goes, it is the law. You cannot go. But, you're only 12. If, as you get a little bit older, you still would like to go, I want you to apply, and if you're denied, we'll sue the government. So I go, wow. My little 12-year-old mind's twirling, and she goes, honey, the most important thing in life is trying for what you think is right. She said, now you need to understand, if you go down and try this, these things take a long time. You could apply, you could sue the government, and you may never get to go. Never get to go. But you should keep going after it. Go after it. And it doesn't matter if you never get to go. She said, because if you're right, the law will change. And then some women will get to go after you. And she goes, that's as important as if you got to go. My mother lives with me now. That's why I'm an admiral. So people will tell you no. And it might not be a man. It might be another woman. You don't have to take no for an answer. You don't even have to get into the argument. You just have to go out and do.
When did you figure out you needed a quilting bee?
When did I figure out I needed a quilting bee? I was a lieutenant. I'd probably been in about 7 or 8 years. And one of my friends and roommates from my first ship was a lieutenant commander. I was like, how did she get to be lieutenant commander? I was so competitive. But she was teaching at the ROTC unit at San Francisco. And I was chief engineer on board a ship, and we were chatting, and there weren't a lot of women on the waterfront. In fact, I was the first, I think it was the second woman chief engineer, but I think only the second woman department head out of several dozens of ships up there. And she said, we need to create a forum where we get together as women and offer it up to other women. And so I said, yeah, let's do that. She goes, and you're going to have to be the keynote speaker because you're like the second most senior woman we have around here because I'm the most senior. I go, yeah, that's right. Okay, we'll do it. So we did. We put together a Women at Sea symposium, a lieutenant and a lieutenant commander. And then we opened it up to the waterfront. We found out there was a women tug pilot. This is in the early 90s, family business. And boy, she had some stories about trying to be a woman tug pilot in the Bay Area as, first of in the maritime industry. We advertised. The Texas A&M actually flew in like 40 women midshipmen. We ended up with a couple hundred people. We got a Coast Guard lieutenant commander, one of the first women to command a cutter, to come in and speak. So it was a fantastic event. I found it very energizing. And we actually thought at one point about talking to senior leaders to get permission. I said no, because what if they say no? Well, let's just do it. and we did. And so then after that, there would be, throughout my career, other times where I would get women together. Yes? In the Navy and in our country, yes. So, if I may put something in context to you. So when that 2012 DoD report came out, and then I saw the media reports, I was down at Fleet Forces, and I said, "Hey, somebody get me this report." It's like 800 pages. In the back of that report. It turns out at that point, the Department of Defense had asked Center for Disease Control to do a study on the prevalence of sexual violence in the military. Not just the Navy, but across the services. And so I was astonished then to read that our rates of sexual violence are probably akin to what the rate of sexual violence is outside the wire. So I acknowledge this is a Navy issue, but I was even more disturbed to find out it's a country issue. And I acknowledge, I believe as a leader that our sailors and officers have to set the example. And that we want to be the leaders in this area. And that maybe if we're the leaders, the rest of the country will follow. So, like all of the service, there's just been a tremendous amount of work. The first focus has been on taking care of victims and then holding folks accountable. Where it seemed more work needed to be done was in how we take care of victims, making sure there's a sexual assault coordinator who helps them through the process once they identify themselves, and then a victim legal counsel who now helps them through the process once they identify themselves. So now they have two supporting folks as they go through a process. But the other thing was the real issue that came out of that 2012 report was this belief of underreporting. That there was a extrapolated number that we had more people, and in reality, more men who were sexually assaulted than women who were sexually assaulted. Then the other thing I figured out was that the military definition of sexual assault is very broad. So people, when we say sexual assault, people go to rape. All of this is wrong, but if someone is groped, that's sexual assault. If a male slaps another male on the butt and he didn't want it, that's sexual assault in the military. So those large numbers include all of that behavior. It includes whether it's civilian on military or whether it's military on military. It's all of that. So it doesn't matter if it happened on the base or out in town. It represents all of those numbers. So, okay, why aren't people reporting? The survey said people didn't trust that we were doing things. So literally one of the first things the Navy did is we started to, if you go to our Navy website, we list now all of misbehavior that's done by people, whether or not they went to a court-martial, and what the outcome of the court-martial is. So we said we need to let people know that we hold people accountable. And then we have to set up training for all of our sailors. So we went through a process where first we had training for senior leadership, and then we had training for sailors. And then we went into scenario-based training so that we could help our sailors, particularly the younger sailors, understand what sexual assault is. And that was eye-opening for me. we actually had some young sailors come up after the training and go, I think I've been sexually assaulted, and it had not ever been in their mind that they had been. And so what we've seen now since that journey started over the last year and a half is the reporting numbers have come up. And there's now more of a latency to the reporting numbers, which is a little unsettling in some ways, but giving us more confidence in the numbers in other ways. And what do I mean by latency? So now, somebody might say, I was sexually assaulted, and we'll say, okay, when did it happen? And they'll say, it happened before I came in the Navy. But those numbers all come in, and they all count as our sexual assault numbers. And I'm happy, I want them to come forward, because they probably still have issues that they are dealing with prior. Doesn't matter when it happened. Doesn't matter if it happened 5 years ago. They are now, if they trust enough to say it happened a long time ago, they now trust that the Navy will get them care. That's really what they're looking for. If you're a victim, you probably haven't gotten past it. So those are some of the things we're doing, and then we're continuing to now look at, okay, how do you get so you're preventing these things from happening? And I think the best way for that is you have to have conversations with your people. So whether it's on a campus like this, or you're sitting down with your team in an office, or you're on a ship, you really have to talk to people about what does sexual assault mean, how do you go about having a good work environment, what is a good work environment. Turns out you have to have some very basic conversations. And then how do you prevent sexual assault? And then the big thing for us is, I talk to the sailors about courage. We have to have, if someone is a victim, they have to have the courage to come forward. But more importantly to me is, generally in an organization, somebody sees something. We need those people to have courage to step in and help their shipmates. And so we've started our training so that we're teaching others to help shipmates. Shipmates help shipmates. And that, I think, is turning out to be much more successful than anything else we could get after. Yeah. So the issue is, can you keep your sense of self as you give up this baggage? I mean, that's a fantastic question, because it gets to the identification of yourself and what are you giving up. And every person's different. Every person has something that makes them special and magnificent. And when you're looking at all these things you have, you probably need to hang on the things that are core to yourself. Those aren't. So maybe you'll hang on to the big round platter Grandma gave you and get rid of the rest of the dishes. Maybe you'll hang on to the musical instrument. So there's some things you do have to keep. And there's as you self-assess, what are habits that you have that you can just let go of? You put it in terms of behavior, in terms of, I was willing to let go of dresses, which may translate to feminine clothing. Having talked to other women who wear uniforms, maybe you don't have to discard it lightly, keeping that little platter. I talked to Captain Mary Jackson, who had command of a destroyer and has 2 kids. She goes, I like to get my pedicures, and I like pink. So she does it. She gets a pedicure every time she pulls into port. So maybe you just wear the dresses less frequently and not completely let them go. So there's going to be other things that are burdens. The way you have relationships, the way you behave with other people. And you can let that go. I have found you cannot change other people's behavior. Trust me, I've been married for 25 years. You can only change your own behavior. And then you literally can let a lot of things go. You do not have to go through a cycle of conversation again and again, whether it's at work or or at home. You just let it go.
Admiral Howard, I admire your optimism and your sense of humor. How did you deal with rejection and adversity?
You just kick their ass. That's what you just go. You just go kick their ass. So, yes, I think there are parts in everybody's life where they deal with rejection and barriers. And some of the most illuminating conversations I've had are with people who are in wheelchairs. Wow. Because if you're in a wheelchair, there's just all these assumptions about you, and people will start yelling at you, I guess, like you're deaf, and it is a very challenging life. So, as I grew up in the Navy, yes, there were knuckleheads who came into my life. And so the first thing is you have to identify that they are a knucklehead. And then you have to take a deep breath and think about how you are going to deal with the circumstances. Knowing you can't change their behavior, you can only change your own. And some of it is the courage to actually go have a conversation with them. But think about it beforehand. Is this a conversation where you might need a shipmate to come with you to have the conversation? But just letting things continue on the way they are is never ends up being satisfactory for anyone. So you, as you go through and meet the occasional knucklehead, will figure out how to talk with them, communicate with them, deal with them, and then move on with your life. The other thing, the skill I think you have to acquire is that as you have these barriers, is not to paint your whole world through that lens. It is very, very easy, depending on your life, if you run into a lot of knuckleheads, just to go, well, they're all knuckleheads. And then that really starts to change you as a person. That you don't meet people believing they're good, you start to meet people thinking they're bad, or that it's the organization, it's the man. No, it's that one knucklehead. Kick his ass. And then move forward. And dealing with that one person might be the best thing for them as well. Sometimes people don't even know they're knuckleheads because no one ever took the time to let them know. Who knew? So the only issue I have now is I'm so senior, no one's ever going to let me know I'm a knucklehead again. Well, you know, Admiral, that's not going to happen.
Did you see yourself as an admiral someday, or was that your goal, or at what point did you see your goal?
So when I started in Annapolis, women weren't even serving on ships. That happened while I was at Annapolis. And then after I had a cruise on the USS Spruance, I thought, wow, this is something I'd like to do. I'd like to go to sea. And within the first few years of doing that, I was like, I'd like to command a ship. So that first goal was like a 20-year goal. And I knew that. There are a lot of positions along the way you have to get to. So then I grew up in the Navy, got to command Rushmore, and literally the day after the change of command, my husband's like, well, now what? I go, oh, crap. That big open landscape reached the destination, now what? And I said, well, I'd like to command again. And so since then, I've commanded at the 06 level and as a 1-star and as a task force commander. But no, during that time that I was pursuing command, I was not thinking that I'm going to be an admiral. And part of that, I think, is also the circumstances. There were very few women admirals when I started the journey, so it's sometimes when there's not somebody like that out there, if there's no Mary Walker ahead of you, you're not thinking about that there's a possibility. Somebody's got to be the first Mary Walker. So the first woman 3-star, Admiral Tracy, happened about the time I had about 18, 19 years in the Navy. So it's not until it starts happening that you even start to think about the possibility.
Sorry if I may, this
4 stars. That you were a great example of how much we as a nation and the Navy would lose if we put artificial barriers in. Can you comment, that was referring to the glass ceiling, I'm sure, but can you comment on that statement and what it means
Sure.
for you and for other women?
I have a friend who, first woman who had command of a ship was a diver. She retired as a commander, then went on to get her doctorate in organizational behavior, Diving Hall of Fame, underachiever, of course. She actually did a study on women admirals and generals. She calls it breaking the brass ceiling. So some of this is, in our case, the law. So 1967 was the first time women could become admirals or generals in our military. And so for the Navy, the first woman admiral was head of the Nurse Corps, Arlene Dirk. She was promoted in 1972. Then when I came into the Navy, policy changed and women could serve on non-combatant ships, but it was the law that I could not serve on a combatant ship. And that law did not change until 1993 and 94 for women. And so one of the things you see for women in the Navy and Air Force, when that combat exclusion law was repealed and women could serve in combatant aircraft and serve in combatant ships, it just opened up opportunities for women to grow up. If you cannot serve in the mainstream of an organization, then it's very hard to grow up to be a leader. So I think the other piece he may be alluding to is, of course, right now we're all going through the reviews for special forces, and then for my land friends, they're looking at infantry and armored battalions. But in Secretary Mavis's case, it was while he was secretary that we opened up submarines to women. So you have to, the opportunities have to be there in order for any human being be able to go down that path and eventually, reach the height of whatever it is.
I wanted to ask you the question about what inspiration that you got from your mother to go into a very male-dominated field.
Okay, well, I think I may have answered that a little bit already, because she's the one who encouraged me to go after my goals and pursue them regardless of the fact whether or not I might achieve them, but I might help other women achieve them. So that, I would say that's probably some of the best advice. And then also, she's the one who just said you need to embrace where you are and who you are. And so that was superb advice, even if I was not happy with it at the time. So those would be, for me, the two main things. The only other thing I will tell you, my mother moved in with my husband and me 4 years ago, so the role reversal of the relationship has actually been quite satisfying to me. You have a curfew, Mom, just so you know. Oh, and you're going to break it, yeah. Could you put gas in the car? So the learning from my mother, having her full-time back in my life, continues. So at this point, I would say the biggest thing I'm learning from her is how to be a good listener. Oh, yes, ma'am. I thought that was the last question, because I'm an introvert and I'm kind of tired right now.
I can tell. Thank you so much for being here. I just have one question for you.
Sure.
Would you like to be Commander-in-Chief? If you would, I would vote for you.
I was really pretty fortunate a couple of years ago. I was invited to Wellesley to speak at the Madeleine Albright Center. And in between the winter and spring semester, in this deep, cold winter, in between the school term, they take 7 or 8 days, and they bring the women of the college together, and they bring in speakers. And it's not all of the women. It's a very special event where they have to apply and they get accepted. So I was with a group of women. It was called Women in Diplomacy Through Defense. I was with women ambassadors, generals from the Army, and we're just talking to 110 or so Wesley women. And I told them what I believe to be the truth, that there's the one kind of courage that women say, oh, I want to grow up to be a firefighter, or I want to grow up to be a policewoman, I want to join the military and, fly a fighter jet off a carrier. There's a different kind of courage that's public service, that's politics. And the Wesley woman said, well, what would you have us do? Would you have us join the military? I said, oh, no, we're fine. I need, as a citizen, I need women to go into politics. I don't know why you're hung up on the Navy having 18% female, because I'm not sure then you've looked at the House and Senate lately. When we talk about less than 25% in a non-traditional field, we are lacking a voice where law is made, law that I make an oath to defend along with the Constitution and uphold. So I'm not going to be the Commander-in-Chief, but the Commander-in-Chief might be out in this audience, and it's, as a woman, perhaps a little disquieting that there's women four-star admirals and generals, because there were women in the Army and Air Force who came before me, but not yet a woman Commander-in-Chief. So thank you for that question.
The Andrews Center for Public Policy is a nonprofit organization and a division of Boise State University's College of Social Sciences and Public Affairs. Our mission is to inform and educate about gender equity, education, and the environment. You can learn more at andrewscenter.boisestate.edu.